Hi, welcome to Up Your Nerd Cred. Did you used to know everything that was happening in the Marvel and DC universes? Did finding out that some superheroes are from Marvel and some are from DC blow your mind? Has keeping track of everything that's been happening there and then realizing that we're only talking about the cinematic universes and not the comics ones, actually, and that all of these universes, with all of their own multiverse crises, have gotten a little bit out of hand? Well, don't worry. Up Your Nerd Cred is here to talk about the gods cosplaying as men, the men cosplaying as gods, and how much the cinematic universes are really leaving out. At the end of each episode, you'll hopefully know a little bit more than you did and can up your nerd cred. I'm your casual nerd host, CiCi. So, my kid is now confident enough to go up and down the stairs unaccompanied, which means that now I have to baby-proof the part of the house that he couldn't get to alone before, because now if he wakes up in the middle of the night to go and play in husband guy's office, I might not actually find out until later, which is, fun and exciting. But, let's be sure to clarify the fact that this is me a solo episode because our expert is not here. So if it is a solo episode, if it is just me, it is just going to be a casual level podcast. This is going to be about you and me making sure that we are learning about the kind of things that we will need to find out whenever it is that we are actually talking to the expert about things. However, I want to make sure that we are clear that just because we are clarifying this format does not mean that we are actually going to skip out on the format altogether, right? Of course not. So, podcast listeners, what are we nerding out about this week? Now, as always, you can nerd out about all kinds of things. It does not have to be just heroes and villains, okay? Water sommeliers exist. Subreddit drama exists. And our Patreon low-key also exists. Teehee. So what am I actually nerding out about? Well, I'm actually nerding out about how hyped I am to not be traveling for Thanksgiving this year and to actually like everything that's on the table. Do I have a lovely time at everyone else's Thanksgiving table? Yes. Do I also have people in my friend and family group who put out whole cranberry sauce, incorrect crunch ratio on their green bean casserole, and not enough lemon meringue pie? Yes. Plus, also, I'm not gonna lie, I like my mac and cheese just a tiny bit more than my mom's, and you and I both know that I don't get to bring the mac and cheese to my mom's house. Let's not get crazy here, okay? Okay. Also, as of record time, I have not seen Wicked Part 2. By the time this episode drops, I will have. And honestly, if you don't know what a theater kid I am at heart, I'm not sure if you're the listeners that we know and love, okay? I love this show so much. There's so much to talk about it. And now I'm going to go take a quick break to rewatch Part 1, and we will be back to up your nerd cred. Hi, welcome back. So, there's a quote actually from Wicked, as we're thinking about it, is so Blenda asks the people of Munchkinland, are they born wicked? Or, do they have wickedness thrust upon them? And it's worth thinking about, because realistically speaking, every single hero that emerges and also every single villain that emerges, at least based on like the comic, universes that we have, they all come about because a sperm cell has entered an egg cell. But realistically speaking, the nature versus nurture debate has been raging for centuries, okay? Centuries. Multiple scientific fields are dedicated to parsing how these things all come together to form a person, okay? Nature versus nurture is very, very solidly the foundation of a lot of scientific questions. And I'm not going to lie, many dissertations have been written about the topic. Also, Speaking of dissertations, a friend of mine since high school, oh my God, high school. Anyway, he got his PhD in, I want to say it's biochemistry, but I'm sure it's actually a much, much fancier name. Anyway, since his name is literally S. Strange, more specifically Scott Strange, but S. Strange, throughout the time that he was working on this degree, I started telling him that he needed to go ahead and get his cape and his cosplay accoutrement because he needed to go ahead and go for Halloween or proper cosplay as Doctor Strange, right? Like, I mean, come on, it is literally right there. And so here's the problem. I was not actually able to convince him to dress up as Doctor Strange, but Dr. Dr. Scott Strange. But if I say Dr. Scott too many times on this podcast, realistically speaking, somebody's going to think more Rocky Horror Picture Show than Doctor Strange. So that's why I'm going with the Dr. S. Strange. Anyway, not important. He did specifically request this episode, and I am pretty sure it's because that he is reminding me that, well, I mean, he could always go Dr. Hugo Strange. So while I was definitely thinking of Dr. Stephen Strange, I could be mistaken. So in honor of Dr. S. Strange, let's actually talk about the two Doctor Stranges that we have in the Marvel and DC universes. Now, if you're even a little familiar with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you have probably heard of Doctor Stephen Strange. But now, again, remember, this is the casual nerd episode, right? So I didn't actually watch Gotham when it came out. And the clips that I did actually watch tended to focus more on the rogues gallery that we're generally familiar with, right? Penguin and folks like that. And if you both didn't watch Gotham and didn't have AM's knowledge of the Golden Age villains, you probably didn't realize that Hugo Strange doesn't have nearly the respect put on his name as he should. Now, what I will say, though, about them both is that they are absolutely a case study in how being brilliant and methodical can go in many ways, okay? Beyonce and Jack Kirby are both Virgos, but so are Ivan the Terrible and Ron DeSantis, okay? So let's talk about the main characters that we're talking about today and, kind of see what happens. So we have Dr. Stephen Vincent Strange, who at various points is the Sorcerer Supreme of Earth. Now, this gentleman was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko in Strange Tales number 110 in 1963. Now, Stephen is a brilliant neurosurgeon with the kind of gifted hands that would make Ben Carson jealous, and also made Stephen into a bit of an asshole. He's got something of an eidetic memory, which, did make it that much easier for him to rise to prominence and adulation. But to be a superhero, you need to actually have a little bit of humility, and humility hit him like a truck. Well, actually, a car crash that, fucked up his hands. Now, you can't have hand trimmers when you're cutting into brain tissue. And when his wealth and connections couldn't develop the scientific method to develop the nerve damage to his hands, he did what a lot of disillusioned white dudes do and went to Asia. Specifically, he went to the Himalayas to seek out the Ancient One. Because if science wasn't cutting it, maybe magic would, right? And it's worth noting that while the rugged determination that it would really require for someone in the real world to see if magic worked, I will note that in the Marvel Universe, magic has been around, okay? Even if it's not really part of the mundane, okay? So Stephen seeking out the next level of possibility with the confidence that he'd be able to either pay someone or learn how to fix his hands magically, despite the no's that he'd received scientifically, is a quintessential characteristic of Stephen. That he tends to become a spectacular magic wielder across realities, okay? This man uses magic like it's going out of style, okay? Perhaps it's just the Asimov quote about, any kind of sufficiently advanced science being indistinguishable from magic. I suppose they also had that in Thor 2 as well, but, not important. Because once the Ancient One has humbled him, and he begins to actually sit there and tap into the forces that he was unfamiliar with. Stephen Strange's his education. He's a bit of an asshole because he's right. And he's right a lot because he's got a bit of a like photographic memory thing. Now, if you couple having not entirely photographic, but pretty solidly photographic memory with being able to learn while he's astrally projecting himself and sleeping physically, right? This man is a problem, okay? So, yes, he did come by his neurosurgery skills and his sorcery skills pretty much the same way. Lots and lots and lots of study, okay? Now, does he need to learn to regulate his self-determination? Yes. Does that self-determination do a lot for him? Yes. And now, while it was doing pretty well for him before, because let's be honest, being a neurosurgeon is not easy. Now, magic user Steven is, he's out here working with the Cloak of Levitation, all right? He's got the Eye of Agamotto, right? And these are part of his everyday wear, okay? In Multiverse of Madness, you'll see that, he's at his ex Christine's wedding, right? In the main universe that we're looking at. And because there's a situation happening during the reception, his Cloak of Levitation just more or less is able to, kind of pop out and, help him change his whole vibe or whatever as he is jumping off from the side of the building that he is on to deal with the weird eye creature thing that Scarlet Witch has sent to chase America Chavez. There's a lot happening there, but realistically speaking, this man has really sat there and put forth some effort into making sure that he is a part of things on a regular basis, just every day, right? And also, honestly, more than anything, because I live in New York City, I am super jealous about the fact that he has this, oh my God, he has this sweet Greenwich Village manse, right? The Sanctum Sanctorum. And he doesn't have to pay rent on it. He's not responsible for the costs on that. And sure, yeah, he's not really operating on patience anymore, but he's also defending the entire planet. So his sacrifice is one that I personally am willing to make. Shrek joke. Now, I also will note that he is not always the Sorcerer Supreme, and he has in fact lost the title over the course of time, but that does not mean that he is not relevant to this and other planes of existence, right? Okay, so live action wise, not that many people have portrayed him, actually. Peter Hooton played him in a 70s made for TV kind of thing that didn't really have the staying power of the Star Wars holiday special, right? But realistically speaking, the image of your head is probably of Stephen Strange as portrayed by Benedict Cumberbatch. We actually first met his version of Doctor Strange in 2016's version of Doctor Strange. And honestly, he's been kind of a major player in most of the Marvel crossovers since he was really introduced, right? So Cumberbatch's version of the character, he has the canon event for Doctor Strange, right? There is a car crash that messes up his hands. And because there is a car crash that messes up his hands, he does everything that he can to go and do something about it. Ultimately, he ends up going to the Himalayas to find the Ancient One to see what he can do to a certain extent mentally to fix his hands because of the issues that he's kind of dealing with the fact that, again, you can't really have brain tissue in your hand if you have tremors. It's not going to work. Now, while the MCU's Ancient One is Tilda Swinton and her very complicated stint as his mentor remain there are a lot of similarities to what was happening in the comics. Realistically speaking, Stephen Strange in the comics and in the MCU pretty much wandered around with the absolute certainty that he can do or learn to do anything, which, also was kind of boosted by the fact that the time that he had an extra helping of Dormammu, and by that I mean Dormammu repeatedly killing him. Now, at the end of Stephen Strange 1, rather than really kind of working with the other sanctums, with the other sorcerers who were out there who had been doing this for a while, he decided to trap Dormammu, a being from outside of time, in a time loop. The whole Stephen, no, Stephen, yes of him is really, really irritating and is not always actually as useful as the self-killing situation with Dormammu was. So again, if you're a MCU kind of fan, the Multiverse of Madness actually had multiple whole universes that ended up in incursions, aka destroyed because they ended up, in a collision with other universes because he was so convinced of himself. And the Darkhold maybe a little bit amplified that to some dangerous levels, but that's not important. What's important is the fact that this arrogant behind man was so convinced of himself that he created multiple situations in which universes are crashing into each other, right? I mean, it's just like, yes, queen, believe in yourself. But also, knowledge being power requires regulation, right? Because if you're not regulated, that's how you get a Hugo Strange. Wait, who exactly is Hugo Strange? Why, thank you so much for asking, self. So, Dr. Hugo Strange is the other Strange of the hour. He was created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane, and he actually made his debut in Detective Comics number 36, 1940. Most of the rogues gallery that we associate with Batman actually comes after Hugo Strange's creation. Joker and Catwoman are both younger, quote unquote, than Hugo, although, let's be honest, again, age is very, very fluid in this kind of universe, considering that none of them are in their, I guess, hundreds now. So there's that. Now, it has become something of a trope these days, but in the 1940s, Hugo Strange was Gotham's premier mad scientist, okay? And this was, relatively novel at the time. And actually worse, he was kind of normal. Like, did he end up having Victor Frankenstein vibes behind closed doors? Maybe. But while Mary Shelley's doctor was a little successful, Hugo Strange was very successful. So he started out by just making it kind of, really foggy so that his henchmen could go and rob banks. And then he got some really fun cocktail shaker action going by giving several Arkham escapees a delightful amount of human growth hormone, turning them into monster men. So definitely some cannibalism and the like that retcons have pop up later, but ultimately the monster men did cause a substantial amount of carnage, and it was really not for the faint of heart. Right. So, Batman goes and takes on Doctor Strange. And after a Sherlock x Moriarty type fight, Batman actually sends him to his apparent death off of a cliff. Yeah, it doesn't take, though. I mean, it didn't take for Moriarty either, but I mean, it didn't take for Hugo Strange. He actually managed to come back and spread. It's not quite a fear toxin per se, but it's not a fear toxin. Let's call it a general psychoactive gas, and it's leading to really a heightened anxiety and fear response around Gotham, which then ended with him getting punched off of a cliff by Batman. Again, it's the 1940s. There's a lot going on, okay? It took a little bit of actual work to come up with good storylines, okay? All right? In fact, it took so long that it took them from the 1940s to the 1970s to come up with a new storyline for him. Is it because they couldn't figure out what to do with him? Was he uninteresting? No, of course not. He was just not nice enough for the Comics Code Authority. Apparently, a psychiatrist who likes to experiment on the human psyche isn't on the approved list. He missed the vast majority of the Silver Age because, realistically speaking, he was more upsetting to the Code Authority than the Joker was. Now, it is worth reminding you that the Comics Code Authority, beyond their insistence that crime always be punished, they were also really salty about the prospect of authority figures being either lampooned or actively using their positions of authority to be corrupt. And let's also point out the fact that the 90s and 50s weren't particularly friendly for any kind of mental health issues as it was. So even though psychiatrists were respected as physicians, it was a lot easier for them to depict the mentally ill as the kind of person who would turn into a psychotic clown who decided to go out and rob banks. That somehow played better on the public scale than the prospect of the psychiatrist acting unethically. We've also discussed the moral panic surrounding comic books that spiked after Seduction of the Innocent came out in our What Age Is It episode. So as much as I would love to, I'm not going to go too deeply into a rant about it, right? Go check that episode out for the various sarcasms that I have. But what I will say, it is proof that the CCA doesn't run anything anymore because now we have both of those in one canon bisexual. That's right. We have an unethical psychiatrist and a psychotic clown who likes to rob banks, who also kisses Poison Ivy. Mwah! I do enjoy Harley Quinn so much. Anyway, now what matters? I mean, look, even Catwoman was allowed back in the main canon before Hugo Strange was. And honestly, even when he did come back, he once again got a pretty short shrift. So in the 70s, Hugo had gotten bored of living in Europe after he had faked said second cliff death and decided he wanted to come back and tussle with the bat again. And so he opened a hospital for the ultra wealthy. And when Bruce Wayne checks in, Hugo is actually able to put together pieces and figure out Batman's identity. And then he's killed by one of the people he's trying to auction the identity off to. And then Hugo's ghost haunts said killer until he confesses. Except for no, haha, just kidding. He faked that death again. Not only that, but the ghosts that were haunting old dude were actually just carefully placed holograms. It's kind of weird that the world's greatest detective just keeps assuming that this guy that he punches off cliffs is dead. Also, realistically speaking, it is a bad idea because Dr. Hugo Strange has a lot of feelings about Batman. Feelings that he should be Batman. You know how Dr. Doom has Doombots? Hugo Strange has Monster Men. And so between the Monster Man and drugging Bruce, he's actually made some very towards hijacking the identity of the Bat. But after a confrontation with Batman in a Wayne Manor replica, Hugo went ahead and triggered an explosion and was just like, oh, if I can't be Batman, then no one can. Kind of a whiner, right? Because, of course, Bruce survives, and there's no trace of Hugo Strange, and he is gone forever! Just kidding. Because Earth 2 Hugo connects to Earth 1. And Earth 2 Hugo didn't actually bounce back as easily after his various cliff diving adventures. And so this version of him it's a mess. Actually, a mess is putting it lightly because the surgeon that he bribed to fix him didn't really do a good job. And Hugo ended up quite deformed and quite cranky about it. And so to fix it, he then figures out a way to connect Earth 1 Batman or connect to Earth 1. And so then Earth 1 Batman connects with Earth 2 Robin and Catwoman. And then that trio discovers that Hugo is actually just low-key angry about how his body was broken because of, what happened. And so, unfortunately, Earth 2 Hugo Strange passes himself away, and he stops mattering, right? Until the 90s. So, Batman Prey. So this storyline in the 90s reimagined him as the kind of pundit that, honestly, Nancy Grace wished that she was, okay? And now, although Nancy wasn't as prone to diagnosing any kind of person that she was talking about with such severe mental health issues as DID, the way that Hugo Strange did, at least she didn't do it publicly. Within the comics, he actually manages to initiate a whole smear campaign against Batman, right? And there's a whole new villain in the form of the Night Scourge, right? And Hugh was able to actually disorient Batman to the point where Batman is honestly trying to figure out if keeping the cowl is even worth it. Now, unfortunately, Hugo's insistence on trying to replace Batman proves to be his undoing once again, and he is shot by a GCPD officer who thought that the man who was dressing up as Batman was actually Batman. Look, I'm not gonna lie. It feels weird that Hugo Strange keeps being killed in a way that other members of the Rogues Gallery aren't. I mean, is he low-key more dangerous than everyone else? Is there something very, very specific about his use of psychiatry that's so different from Harley Quinn's or Jonathan Crane's that he has to die every time he encounters the Bat? I don't know. I mean, there's a large amount of the Golden and Silver Ages where he wasn't actually committing capers, and a not insubstantial amount of the Bronze and Modern Ages have really barely paid any kind of attention to him. I mean, to a certain extent, the shifts in attitudes towards therapy and psychiatry in the past 80 years has really meant that the evil psychiatrist isn't really something that rings as true to the culture at large. It's possible that the increased acceptance of psychiatry as a field has negatively impacted his ability to be a victim villain. Honestly, I think it's made him less interesting to the comic readership at large because everyone else has kind of cribbed off his work so much that he's lost the niche that he was in. Savvy mental health professional who's figured out Bat's identity? Harley's got that one. Fear toxin guy? Sorry, that's Dr. Jonathan Crane slash Scarecrow's purview now. Hugo Strange was literally in the Gotham TV show, but if you didn't watch it, like me, there's a strong chance that you missed B.D. Wong's portrayal of the Good Doctor. And listen, I love B.D. Wong, okay? I have been following him as an actor since All-American Girl with Margaret Cho in the 90s, right? But because I didn't watch Gotham, I didn't know that Hugo Strange was there. And anyone who doesn't watch Gotham is also probably in that same boat. Honestly, it's very easy as a casual nerd to completely miss that Hugo Strange exists. But I mean, like, I think there is a reason why he's so unsexy and unpopular as a character. It's not the lack of clown makeup. It's not because he doesn't have a whip or because he doesn't have the ability to rearrange his face. Honestly, it's because Hugo Strange is a cog in the system that's really spent more time and energy on pointing like at the problem than necessarily fixing the problem in question, right? Like pushing Batman to question if dressing up and punching people who are arguably criminally insane is actually evidence that he himself is criminally insane is actually a really interesting premise, but it's not a sustainable one. At least, not directly, right? Like, are there arguments to be made that he's the reason that there are so many PhDs and MDs vexing the Bat? Absolutely. But Hugo Strange has fallen into obscurity because being a psychological manipulator is much harder to make your thing when the Joker is able to get Dr. Quinzel to dive into a vat of chemicals. Being able to manipulate somebody, being able to manipulate like the very hormones that people have, the growth hormone and things, it's not as exciting because Pamela Isley can poison somebody with a kiss, right? You have to get into the lab for that kind of thing. It's possible that had Hugo gone and focused his energy on distinguishing himself through some sufficiently advanced tech/magic, like Steven, he would be a household name. Instead, honestly, he really exists as an underutilized IP, and if James Gunn decides to bring him into the DCU continuity he's building, it could definitely be a great way to analyze Batman from a different point of view. Then again, there's multiple people who could analyze Batman from multiple points of view, because beyond just Scarecrow and Harley, who have their psychiatry PhDs, there's also just, again, a wide swath of people who have a lot of PhDs who are fighting Batman. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break to figure out how many actual PhDs are trying to fight Batman, and we will be back with our thrilling conclusion. Hi, welcome back to our thrilling conclusion. Why did Hugo Strange not have the same impact on the zeitgeist as Stephen Strange? And the decades-long gaps between his appearances, plus the part where Hugo always dies at the end of the rare appearances that he makes, it really makes it difficult for him to have the long kind of brew time that a character that like Stephen Strange has. I mean, let's be honest, technically Iron Man and the kind of that team wasn't really very popular in the Marvel canon. Iron Man was not considered an A-list character until the MCU really launched them. But even with that, Iron Man and Stephen Strange, they maintained a place on the shelves, and therefore they maintained a place in the minds. And then when the comics and MCU versions of Stephen have made a really solid name for him, right? I do think that there are arguments to be made that the different attitudes towards psychiatry and recognition that being in a position of authority does not automatically confer goodness. I'm just saying it could make Hugo Strange a character for the times, okay? And think about it, without the comic code authority's insistence that stories have to be nice, that bad guys always have to be punished, Batman has really had to contend with a lot more psychiatrist villains. And I'm just saying, given the distrust that a lot of the QAnon types have towards modern medicine, I'm just saying Jordan Peterson is popular enough in certain sectors of the internet that Hugh's nefariousness, tendencies towards disinformation, however you want to call it, it might end up topical or political. And obviously, comics are never topical and political, right? Right. So on that note, why don't we switch it up from the comics to the calendar update for the week? Because if we're going to have to deal with the real world in our comics, then let's go ahead and make sure that we move the comics to our real world. So in the debuts and premieres and anniversaries, oh my section, we have a few things happening this week across the Marvel and DC multiverses. November 22nd, 1940. Now, this is a post-crisis thing, but we do have the official first meeting of the Justice Society of America. And again, post-crisis version in November 22nd, 2017. We actually have the debut of Cosmic Ghost Rider in Thanos number 13. And on November 25th, 1975, Juliandra's Shadow debut actually happens in Uncanny X-Men number 97. Whew, there's a lot of things happening. But listeners, it turns out we've come to the end of our podcast. I know, you are clearly devastated because how could it be over so soon? Well, good news. A new episode is coming out next week. And of course, the archives are always available to you in the meantime. Now, Nerd Cred does take time to build, but since it's actually possible to become a real-life Dr. S. Strange, I suppose anything is possible. Yeah. So now's the time to mention that we have an Instagram, we're on Apple and Spotify and YouTube, and honestly, we're working on expanding our reach, but we should be anywhere you can find podcasts, right? And of course, if you like the episode, make sure to rate and review and subscribe, especially if you're trying to up your nerd cred. As an aside, when I say subscribe, I also mean to the Patreon, and that link will in fact be in the show notes. But yes, we have a Patreon now. Please support us. You can follow us on Instagram at UpYourNerdCredPod. If you're looking for me across platforms, I'm at CIRACDAVIS. Kara C. Davis. Make sure you send any of the good cosplay and fan art that you do to my co-host at amdiaz_art. The good fan art, by the way. You can send him the basic stuff, but I'm low-key hoping that he gets the really, really good fan art. Anyway, if you have a burning question that you want us to discuss so that you can up your nerd cred, make sure you like and subscribe and leave comments. And if we pick your question, like we did for Dr. Scott Strange, we will shout you out at the discussion segment. Also, please make sure to get your friends to also like and subscribe to the podcast. And, any of your family members and your coworkers you trust not to be weird about listening to the same podcast as you. And this is where AM says, good night, everybody. Ba 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 ba.